Have you ever felt like a burden in your own home? As if your presence bothered you, as if your existence was something to be hidden by the ones you love most? Well, that's exactly what I experienced. And to this day, I wonder how I found the strength not to break down in that moment. It was an ordinary afternoon, or at least it should have been. I'd helped prepare lunch, cleaned the entire house, and laid out my best floral blouse, the one I always saved for special occasions. I thought we'd be hosting someone important, perhaps an old friend of my children, someone from church, or even a distant relative. But little did I know that day would go down as the most humiliating moment of my life. The doorbell rang. I walked excitedly into the hallway. But before I could even get close to the door, my son stopped me with hard eyes. "Stay in the kitchen, Mom. Please don't come in." I was confused. I tried to argue, but he just held out a wrinkled apron and added, "You're not dressed for this kind of visit." Have you ever felt this way? As if, suddenly, all the love you gave, all the sleepless nights, all the laundry, the knees bent in prayer, the birthdays you organized with sacrifice, just disappeared? As if you'd become nothing more than an inconvenient figure in the lives of the ones you love most? At that moment, I let them put the apron on me. I was in shock. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't react. I just went to the kitchen, as I was told. And I stayed there, my hands trembling on the counter, listening to the laughter in the living room, pretending not to hear the hurried footsteps, the clinking of glasses, the exchange of compliments. They were so concerned about not embarrassing themselves, that they didn't even realize what they were doing to me. The cruelest thing was what they said when the visitor finally arrived. "Sorry for our mess, the cleaning lady stayed late today," they said, pointing at me. Me. The mother. The woman who put food on the table for years. The grandmother who took care of her grandchildren so they could work. The seamstress who stayed up all night making their school costumes. Now I was just the housekeeper. It's hard to explain the feeling. A mixture of shame, pain, anger, and a sadness so deep it feels like my chest will split in half. In my own home, I'd become the shame of the family. Everything I was, my entire history, my dignity. Everything seemed to have been erased with a single sentence. But you know what they didn't know? That the visitor they were trying to impress was someone who knew me better than everyone in that room combined. And in that moment, unexpectedly, something happened. Something that would change everything. Do you know what it's like to spend a lifetime giving yourself completely, believing that love and care would be enough to build unbreakable bonds? I believed. I believed with all my might. And perhaps that's why the pain of that afternoon came not just from what was said, but from everything that was forgotten. My name is Betty. For many years, I was simply Richard and Linda's mother. I never cared about titles. Being a mother was more than enough for me. I was a seamstress, the kind with a sewing machine in the corner of the room, thread in every pocket and a needle-stung finger. I worked outside the home, yes, but what I sewed most in my life were scraps of hope. Each stitch I made was a silent prayer for my children's future. As I embroidered dresses for the daughters of the neighborhood ladies, I thought, one day Linda will wear something beautiful like this, but not because she inherited it. It will be hers. Bought with her own money. And as I stitched dress pants that no one knew the name of the sewer, I imagined Richard walking into an office, proud of where he came from. But life isn't a pretty script. It unfolds silently, in the accumulated fatigue of those who always put things off. I didn't have time for therapy, to ask myself if I was happy. My journey was to wake up early, make coffee, tidy the house, sew all day, and still have a smile on my face when they came home from school. It wasn't easy, but I never complained. Because love, for me, has always been about serving. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. Have you ever found yourself remembering the behind-the-scenes moments of your life, as if watching a movie of your own, one no one else knows? There are scenes that live only within us. Like the time Linda cried because she didn't have the doll all her friends had. I stayed up 3 nights creating a similar one, with scraps that would have ended up in the trash. When I gave it to her, I was so happy I cried in secret in the kitchen. Or when Richard got sick and I exchanged the electricity bill for a medicine the doctor said was better safe than sorry. Small things. But they shape a mother. They shape a woman. And yet, it all seems gone. As if invisible. As if these memories no longer have value in the modern world, where respect has become a luxury and gratitude a rare currency. They grew up. They studied. They worked. And little by little, I was left aside. First in conversations. Then in plans. Finally, in my own home. Watching my children hide behind an apron, afraid I would embarrass the family, was like watching everything I'd built being demolished, without warning. But you know what was harder? It wasn't the public humiliation. It was the silent realization that, for them, I was no longer part of the narrative. I was just a detail that needed to be adjusted so the perfect image would remain intact. I became part of the scenery. An old piece of furniture. Present, but ignored. And yet, even with my heart aching, something inside me refused to accept that new version of reality. Because deep down, the hidden truth behind so much indifference always surfaces. And in that moment, I began to realize that the problem was never who I am, but rather how far they had strayed from who they were. This revelation hurt, but it was also the turning point. I didn't scream, I didn't argue. I just took a deep breath and let time, that old ally of the forgotten, show what was to come. Because that very day, something unexpected walked through that door. And there, between glances and memories, a new part of history began to be written. It's strange to realize that sometimes the greatest loneliness happens within your own home. You're there, present in every detail, but little by little you're erased from history, as if you were an inconvenient blur in the beautiful picture others want to portray. And this doesn't happen all at once. It comes in small doses. They're gestures, subtle words, glances that avoid yours. And when you finally understand what's happening, years have passed, and the pain has set in without asking permission. As I got older, I realized that, to them, I stopped being mother. I became a reminder of the past, something they prefer to keep quiet, out of sight. The hardest part is that no one says it directly. They just change their tone, their schedules, their priorities. They started putting me to bed earlier, saying it was for my own good. But I could hear, behind the door, the prolonged laughter, the lively conversations, the visitors who came and went without even knowing I was there. They said, "Go rest, Mom, you need to take care of yourself." But what they really wanted was for me to stay out of the way. For me to disappear without making a sound. Have you ever felt this way? Invisible in a place where you were once the center of everything? I cared for that house with all my heart. I chose every detail with care. Even the aroma of the coffee bore my mark. But now, I was treated like an uncomfortable presence. Someone who was there because they had nowhere else to go. A moral obligation. And that slowly corrodes the soul. Because what hurts isn't being ignored by strangers. It's being erased by the one you loved most in life. The hidden truth is that there's a silent culture, a modern mindset that sees aging as a problem to be managed. It's not spoken about directly, of course. But you feel it. In the way people avoid listening to you, in the way they start making decisions for you, as if you no longer know what you want or how you feel. As if your journey is over and now your only role is to wait for the end. But I never accepted that role. Even when they cornered me, my spirit screamed. Because I know who I am. I know how much I've sacrificed. I know that every wrinkle on my face carries a story. And every story matters. But the signs of coldness only grew. If I said anything during conversations, they'd change the subject. When guests arrived, it was as if I didn't belong. Once I heard my own granddaughter ask, "Who's that lady over there?" and saw my daughter hesitate before answering. It was like a blow to the chest. I wanted to have the courage to stand up to shout, "I'm the reason all this exists." But I didn't. I just took a deep breath, as I've done so many times in my life, and let the silence speak for me. It's in these moments that we understand the true impact of the choices we make throughout life. I chose to love without measure, and I don't regret it. But loving shouldn't mean disappearing. Love that nullifies isn't love, it's submission. And when I realized this, something inside me began to change. It was a silent transformation. I no longer wanted to just exist in that house. I wanted to be seen, heard, and, above all, respected. This kind of contempt doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, behind the scenes of everyday life. And we often allow it. We think it's normal, part of aging. But it's not. Being old isn't about being useless. It's not about being a burden. Old age is a time of wisdom, of strength. A time when we should be celebrated for everything we've accomplished, not hidden away as if we were a miscalculation. The change began silently, yes. But everything inside me was already screaming for justice, for dignity. And it was in this charged atmosphere, in this interplay of appearances and silences, that something, or rather someone, unexpected crossed my path and interrupted that cycle of invisibility in a way no one could have predicted. That day started differently. I could tell by the hurried footsteps in the house, the whispers between doors, the smell of new perfume in the hallway. Everything was impeccable. The silverware was lined up like a wedding dinner, the sofa was wrinkle-free, the pictures were clean, even the bathroom towel had been changed. There was a nervousness in the air, a tension masked by excitement. My son and daughter-in-law paced back and forth with anxious looks, arranging every detail as if they were about to welcome someone of great importance. And they were. But what hurt me wasn't their effort. It was their excessive care in excluding me. While the entire house was being prepared for the visit, I was left behind. Literally. They asked me not to show my face. They ordered me to stay in the kitchen, away from the living room, out of sight of anyone who would arrive. And to complete the scene, they placed an apron in my hands. A small gesture, but one loaded with everything one doesn't have the courage to say out loud. I understood the message. It was as if they were saying, "Stay where you belong." Do you know what it's like to feel like your very presence has become inconvenient? I stood there, my heart aching, clutching that piece of cloth as if holding back my own silence. I didn't cry. Not then. But something inside me crumbled subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was the feeling of being treated like an extra in the story I'd helped create. As if I were just a memory they were trying to hide. And as I busied myself pretending to wash the already clean dishes, I heard the voices rising in the living room. Nervous laughter, rehearsed phrases, that artificial cheerfulness we learn to recognize over time. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend it didn't affect me. But there, amid the steam from the kettle and the smell of baking, my mind began to wander. Forgotten scenes from my youth surfaced. My first jobs, the fear of failure, the days when there wasn't enough food and I pretended not to be hungry so the boys could eat. I remembered the late nights sewing last-minute costumes, the time I sold my engagement ring to buy a school uniform, the letters I wrote and never sent, just to clear my chest. It was in these backstage areas of my life that I was formed. It was there, in anonymity, that I grew as a woman, as a mother, as a human being. So, in that moment, alone in the kitchen of the house where I had once been the center of everything, I felt something was about to change. Not out of anger, but out of an inner revelation. It was as if life was telling me, pay attention. Something is about to happen that you need to see. And it did. The doorbell rang. The sound was different. Not because of the melody, but because of the atmosphere. What should have been just another social visit became a milestone in my journey. I felt it. In my body. In my stomach. In my soul. My eyes instinctively sought the crack in the door. I saw my son's look of astonishment, my daughter-in-law's nervousness as she tried to fix her hair with trembling hands. And when the door opened, time stood still. It was as if the past had entered the room. I hadn't seen that face in decades, but I could never forget it. And there she was. With the same sweet gaze, but now more mature. Her silver hair betrayed the passing of time, But her smile was the same as in childhood. Mary Ellen. My childhood friend. The one with whom I shared bread and secrets, who knew my essence before life hardened me. She entered, looking around gently, but also with keen perception. I noticed when she noticed my apron hanging on the chair, when her eyes fixed for a second on the kitchen in the background. And it was in that instant, in that meeting between what we were and what we've become, that the course of history began to shift. Not because I planned it, but because the truth always finds a way to emerge. And there, before eyes that tried to hide and others that came to reveal, something invisible began to stir in the air. An energy of justice, of reunion, of something that finally needed to come to the surface. I didn't know whether to smile or cry. I stood there, the dish towel still in my hands, as if that frozen image before me were a delusion of memory. Mary Ellen. I repeated the name over and over, as if trying to believe it was really happening. Time hasn't been kind to either of us. The years have marked her face with the same honesty they've marked mine. But there was a beauty in the truth in her gaze. That purity that never fades, even after so many falls. She walked around the room with firm steps, and even though they tried to distract her with conversations, fake smiles, and rehearsed words, her eyes soon sought out the corners. The backstage. The areas where truths are hidden. And when our eyes met, it was as if all the memories of our childhood came rushing back. It wasn't just recognition. It was reunion. It was soul recognizing soul. In those seconds, I was transported back in time. We were two barefoot girls, running across the dirt yard, sharing a slice of stale bread as if it were the world's greatest feast. I remembered the day her father left, and her mother cried silently. I sat with her outside, and we stayed there until the sun went down. Without saying a word. Just sharing the silence. After that, we became inseparable. We shared everything. Clothes, dreams, fears. She knew the scars my mother hid with makeup, and the bruises the world would still inflict on us. Mary Ellen left when we were still teenagers. Her mother got a job in another city, and they moved suddenly. We lost touch for years. Life took us on different paths. She graduated, traveled, built a career. I stayed. I planted roots in the pain and routine. But there, in that unexpected reunion, none of that mattered. It didn't matter what life had done to each of us. What mattered was that the truth that shaped us, was standing before me. And she was seeing me. Truly. As she approached, I saw my son step forward with a forced smile. He introduced himself, tried to lead the conversation. But Mary Ellen was focused. Her eyes didn't lie. She looked directly at me and said, her voice firm but choked, "Betty." The way she said my name, it was like bringing me back to myself. Like reclaiming a part of me that had been hidden for years. I felt tears welling up, but I swallowed them hard. I didn't want them to see my fragility. Not at that moment. Mary Ellen looked around and naturally, like someone who sees something very wrong and can't keep quiet, asked, "Why is she wearing an apron? Why is she in the kitchen?" The silence that fell over the room was almost palpable. My son laughed awkwardly, my daughter-in-law looked away. But she didn't smile. She just crossed her arms and waited for an answer that never came. At that moment, something changed. The atmosphere in the house, the posture of those present, even the air seemed denser. It was as if her presence had shattered the carefully constructed bubble of appearances. I felt it in the details. In the nervousness of her gestures, the hesitation of her words. And most impressively, she didn't need to raise her voice. Her authority came from the truth she carried, the history that united us, and the silent respect that only shared pain teaches. There, standing before the woman who knew my essence before any title, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. Not because someone gave it to me, but because someone saw me. And being seen, after so long being invisible, is like being reborn from within. That moment, so simple to the outsider's eyes, had a profound impact. It was a break in a cycle. A crack in the theater of hypocrisy. And that look between us was enough for what was hidden to begin to emerge. Mary Ellen didn't need to say much. She carried within her a strength that came not from status or achievements, but from memory, from truth. And that truth was about to unleash something no one there would be able to control. Her question was still echoing in the corners of the room when silence fell. "Betty, what are you doing with that apron?" It wasn't said with anger or pity. It was said with the disconcerting honesty of someone who sees beyond appearances, beyond the role they tried to force upon me. That question was a mirror, and it shattered the moment it was asked. My daughter-in-law pretended to set the table, averting her eyes. Richard tried to offer some explanation, something about me insisting on helping, about how much I enjoy staying in the kitchen. But his voice wavered. It was fragile, lacking conviction. Mary Ellen didn't respond. He just looked at me again. Her eyes didn't ask for answers, they asked for truths. And it wasn't mine she wanted to hear. It was theirs. It was then that she turned to them both, a mixture of disbelief and indignation on her face, and said bluntly, "You hid your own mother?" That sentence needed nothing more. It single-handedly swept away the facade that had been so carefully constructed. I saw in Richard's eyes the same expression he'd had as a child, when I'd caught him in some silly lie and he'd been at a loss for words. But in that moment, he wasn't a child anymore. And the lie wasn't silly. It was an entire structure built on convenience, vanity, and, above all, ingratitude. Mary Ellen continued, "She's the most honorable woman I've ever known. Do you have any idea what this woman has been through? Do you know what she did for you? Do you know what she gave up so you could have everything you have today?" And with each sentence, I felt like a weight was lifted from my shoulders. Not because I needed to be defended, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone was saying out loud what I'd always kept silent. The transformation in that environment was subtle but devastating. I saw my granddaughter's expression change. She looked at me with different eyes, as if seeing, for the first time, the woman behind the grandmother role. And perhaps she was. Because often, what a person hides most is the role they fulfill within a family. I was reduced to taking care of the grandchildren, cooking well, not causing any trouble. But no one asked what I felt, what I thought, if I still dreamed. In that moment, the hidden truth was laid bare. That family, so concerned with keeping up appearances for an important guest, ended up being exposed for what they were trying to hide. And the most interesting thing is that it wasn't a scandal. There were no shouting matches. There were only revelations. And those are always more powerful than any argument. As Mary Ellen spoke, I relived scenes that had been swallowed by time. The day I almost gave up, but kept going. The sleepless nights. The silent decisions no one ever knew. The impact motherhood had on my identity. Because being a mother often means no longer being seen as a woman, as a person. It's being placed on a pedestal that's also a prison. And in that moment, listening to every word Mary Ellen said, I realized there was something sacred in that exposition. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. The silent justice that life delivers when least expected, but at the exact time it needs to happen. Richard tried to change the subject. Linda poured the coffee with trembling hands. But the weight of that revelation had already settled, and there was no way to pretend nothing had happened. Mary Ellen approached me, gently removed her apron, and said softly, "You don't need that." It wasn't just about the fabric. It was about the role, the function, the idea that I should settle for less. I stood there, tears in my eyes, unsure whether to thank them or cry. But something inside me had already changed. I wasn't the same woman I'd been this morning. Something had been rescued. Something had been returned. And perhaps in the end, that's what hurts the most. Not the pain itself, but the time it had been hidden. But in that moment I knew. The shame wasn't mine. It never was. And no matter how much they tried to pigeonhole me into a lesser role, those who truly knew me always knew my worth. Mary Ellen's presence didn't just expose the truth about me. It exposed the truth about them. About how bad decisions are often camouflaged with good intentions. About how the "don't bother" mentality can turn into graceful abandonment. About how, little by little, we become accustomed to injustice when it comes disguised as care. The room remained silent. The atmosphere was tense. But inside me, something was beginning to come together differently. As if the pieces of my story were finally being put in their proper place. And I felt like this was just the beginning. Because once the truth comes out, it never goes back under the rug. They stood there, frozen. For the first time, I saw something in my children's eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine embarrassment. Not the automatic, rehearsed embarrassment we learn to display when caught in a mistake. It was something deeper. A real discomfort, as if they'd finally realized the depth of the void they'd created between us. Richard lowered his eyes. Linda shrank back in her chair. Neither of them said a word. And in that awkward silence, I understood that the weight of that truth had finally reached them. But I felt no pleasure in seeing them like that. It wasn't revenge. There was no anger. It was just a strange serenity, like someone finally letting go of a burden they've carried for too long. I didn't need to shout, accuse, or throw it in their face. I just stood there, apron folded in my hands, watching. And that simple gesture, which had once placed me in a submissive position, now seemed to have become a symbol of something greater. Because what they saw in that moment wasn't just the aging mother they'd pushed to the side of the house. They saw the woman. The story. The journey. It's curious how shame shifts when the truth emerges. Until then, I was the uncomfortable figure, the presence they wanted to hide. But all it took was one right look, one perfectly timed sentence, for the tables to turn. And I watched it all unfold with the calm of someone who has weathered life's most difficult storms. The shame, now, was no longer mine. And for the first time, perhaps they were feeling the true impact of the choices they'd made. Those small, everyday decisions, avoiding conversations, not asking how I was, not including them in plans, pretending the past didn't matter. All of this, which had seemed so small, now crushed them. Mary Ellen, with the attitude of someone who didn't need to prove anything, simply crossed her arms and waited. She knew it wasn't her responsibility to correct anyone. Her presence had already done the trick, unearthing what had been buried for so long. It wasn't the screams that disarmed them. It was the lack of justification. Because when the truth is laid before us, there's no argument that holds water. I sat down slowly, still silent. My apron was folded in my lap, as if it were a tangible reminder of what had just been broken. They tried to regain control of the situation, make small talk, offer more coffee, change the subject. But the atmosphere had already shifted. The energy was different. That forced air of hospitality had dissipated. Only the essentials remained. Raw, naked, unvarnished reality. I looked at them both and felt a strange mixture of compassion and distance. Because I knew, and this was perhaps the most painful part, that they weren't evil. They were just blind. Blinded by haste, by image, by the need to appear successful, by the culture of the perfect life that swallows them up without them realizing it. They couldn't deal with their own origins. And I, with my white hair, my simple clothes, and my scarred hands, was the living portrait of everything they were trying to forget. But there, before the woman who knew my essence even before the pain, before my granddaughter, who watched everything with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, and before them, the children I'd raised with so much effort, I realized I no longer needed to prove my worth. I never had, in fact. But now, I saw it clearly. And this clarity is liberating. It changes the way we exist, the way we occupy space, the way we respond to injustice. Their shame wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. A reminder that, sooner or later, life returns everything you give, including what you ignore. And in that moment, it wasn't me who lost. It wasn't me who had to lower my gaze. It was them. And that didn't bring me joy. It gave me a kind of peace that only those who have been silenced for a long time can feel when finally recognized. I said nothing. I just watched. Silence became my most powerful response. Because there was a healing happening there. Not the external, visible, dramatic kind. It was an internal healing. Invisible, but profound. A silent shift in mindset. A thawing of everything that had been bottled up for too long. They didn't know it, but something had broken there. Not the relationship, but the illusion. The idea that I would forever accept that place of invisibility. And even though they didn't have words at that moment, I felt like they were hearing, for the first time, everything I'd never needed to say out loud. And in that moment, between the weight of the silence and the force of the revelations, something began to form deep within my soul. A decision. An inner movement that, until then, I had never allowed to blossom. And maybe that was the first step toward something I didn't even know I needed to experience. Because when we spend too much time trying to maintain peace, we forget to listen to ourselves. But in that moment, listening to their silence, feeling the weight of truth hanging in the air, I began to listen again. Listen to the woman I was, the mother I am, and the person I still want to be. It's difficult to put into words everything I felt. Layers upon layers accumulate over a lifetime. And I know many people watching now understand exactly what I'm talking about. Perhaps you've also experienced this feeling of being ignored, left out, treated as if you were past your prime. Maybe it was with your children. Or in a relationship where you gave too much and received too little. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell me what bothered you most. I read everything. And I can assure you, this isn't just me. There are many people who need to be heard, welcomed, remembered. Sometimes, it's in the comments of videos like this that we find the support we've been missing at home. Every word you write, every like, every subscription here on the channel isn't just a number. It's a sign that this conversation matters. That there's still room in the world for real, profound stories that truly touch us. And when you participate, you help this message reach more people. People who may be silent right now, thinking they're alone on this journey. Your presence here makes all the difference. It sustains this space where we can breathe deeper and say, without fear, I feel this too. I've been there too. I deserve to be seen too. And as that thought matured within me, I realized that small internal decision was taking shape. It wasn't about confronting anyone. It was about freeing myself from something that no longer made sense. About rebuilding from who I am, not what they expect me to be. When Mary Ellen extended that invitation, it wasn't just a kindness. It was like a rope thrown to someone who was already sinking, but disguised it well. She looked me in the eye with the same firmness she'd had when we were girls and said, Betty, come with me. You don't have to accept this place anymore. You deserve respect. And love too. Her words weren't sweet in the light sense. They were sweet in the healing sense. They hit me where I'd been numb for far too long. I didn't respond right away. I had that lump in my throat that you only feel when you hear something you've waited years for without knowing. After she left, I sat in my room, that space that no longer fit me, with the smell of old age that wasn't mine, but that routine imposed, and cried. Not out of resentment. Nor out of weakness. It was a cry of release. Like someone opening a window after years of living in a closed room. I felt the air rushing in. I felt something inside me saying, go. That night was long. My mind was spinning in circles, remembering every scene, every silence, every decision that led me to that point. But it was also the first time in a long time that I felt I had a choice. And that changes everything. When you realize you can still decide, you can still move even one step outside the script they wrote for you, the feeling is liberating. It's like your story is finally back in your hands. I accepted the invitation. Not angrily. Not in a rush. But with a serenity that only comes after years of silent struggle. Mary Ellen welcomed me with a tight hug, and there I understood. I wasn't broken, as I'd been led to believe. I was exhausted. And there, in her home, I found space to breathe again. In the early days, I almost apologized for existing. I woke up early, offered help, and felt uncomfortable not being useful all the time. But she looked at me with affection and said, "Here, you don't have to prove anything." And that broke me down. Because the truth is, we spend so much time trying to justify our own presence that we forget what it's like to simply be. Mary Ellen took me for a walk. She introduced me to her friends. She talked about her projects. We laughed about silly things, ate cake in the afternoon, listened to old songs on the kitchen radio. Simple things. But each one was a reminder of what I had left behind. And I realized how much I had forgotten about myself. Who I was before labels, before roles, before the silent guilt of not being enough for others. Over time, I began to relearn what peace was. Not the peace that comes from the silence of others, but the kind that arises within us, when the soul feels safe. And this safety came from her presence, yes, but it also came from the decision I made. To leave. To allow myself. To look at myself in the mirror without rushing, without judgment. It was like returning to a forgotten time zone. I found myself taking care of my own desires. Choosing my outfit for the day without worrying about what others would think. Cooking whenever I felt like it, relaxing without guilt, reading an entire book without getting up to answer anyone. This wasn't luxury. It was a fresh start. And how beautiful it is when we discover there's still time. My conversations with Mary Ellen were, for me, a kind of healing. She made me see that everything I felt during those years, that feeling of exclusion, of being treated as something outdated, that fear of becoming invisible, wasn't an exaggeration. It was real. And it was cruel. She gave me back not only my self-esteem, but also the freedom to feel legitimately. And that changed my mindset in a way no therapy could have. Staying at her house was like entering a space where time stopped to hear my story. Not as a drama, but as part of a journey that was still under construction. For the first time in a long time, I realized that my life wasn't over. I was just changing phases. And that it wasn't too late to reinvent myself. The decision to accept that invitation was the first step. But it was the coexistence, the day-to-day, the small gestures and the welcoming silences that helped me see myself again. And in this process, something new began to form within me. A strength, a clarity, and above all, a genuine desire to rewrite the next chapters of my life. Now with my voice at the center of the narrative. It took a few weeks. Maybe longer than they cared to admit. But I knew that silence wasn't contempt. It was shame. And on some level, it was also fear. The kind of fear you feel when you're forced to look in the mirror and admit you've wronged someone who least deserves it. I wasn't expecting an apology. Nor did I want one. Because at this point, it wasn't about hearing "I'm sorry." It was about seeing change. Real change. In attitude, in mindset, in posture. But still, when they rang Mary Ellen's doorbell, something inside me quickened. She was in the garden, watering the plants, and looked at me with that calm look of someone who knows everything has its time. I opened the door calmly. Not out of pride, but out of maturity. Richard was standing beside his sister. They both had that uncomfortable expression, as if they'd rehearsed a speech but knew no words would be enough. And, indeed, they weren't. Words are just words. What really matters is the gesture. And theirs, that day, was to go there. To step out of their own bubble of denial to meet me in a place where I was no longer a supporting character. Where I was standing tall, with the reins of my story back in my hands. They began with common phrases. "We've been thinking a lot. It was all a misunderstanding. Maybe we overreacted." And I just listened. Unhurriedly. Without interrupting. Because I knew that, more than speaking, they needed to feel. They needed to hear their own voices telling them what they'd done. They needed to walk this path to the truth on their own 2 feet. When the request finally came, that hesitant, teary-eyed "Mom, we made a mistake." I took a deep breath. I looked into their eyes. I looked with the calm of someone who has carried the world on their shoulders and survived. And I said, firmly but without rancor, when you need me as a mother, remember how you dressed me to please a socialite. Because today, I wear dignity. It wasn't a rehearsed phrase. It came out as an elegant outburst. A subtle reminder that forgiveness doesn't negate consequences. That every choice has its impact. And that I, standing there before them, was no longer the same. They didn't answer. But something in their eyes changed. As if that sentence had shattered the last remaining layer of illusion. There was no argument. No dramatic tears. Just silence. A necessary silence. Like the kind that comes after a storm, when everything is wet, yes, but also cleaner. More truthful. Mary Ellen entered with a tray of tea and acted as if it were just another routine visit. But I knew. She knew. Everyone knew. That moment wasn't just a reunion. It was a redefinition. An invisible turning point. And in that unhurried tea, between careful words and deep breaths, I realized I was experiencing something that had seemed impossible until recently. A reconstruction based on truth. Because the hardest thing, when we're hurt by someone we love, isn't forgiving. It's trusting again. It's making space without giving up. It's keeping our hearts open without giving in to the same cycle of pain. But that day, sitting between the one who hurt me and the one who welcomed me, I chose something new. I chose not to go back to the way I was. I chose to move forward differently. I chose the freedom of no longer needing to remain silent to maintain harmony. And the strangest thing is that they didn't ask me to come back. They didn't invite me back to their home. And I didn't expect that. Because I also no longer wanted that space that belonged to me before. What I wanted, what I was searching for, and what I was now building, was another place. A place where my story had value. Where my decisions were respected. Where I could live without fear of being erased again. They left shortly after. With slow steps. Like someone carrying more weight in their soul than in their hands. And I stood there, watching from the window. Not with pride. But with presence. With that silent awareness that my journey was taking a new direction. A direction that, for many years, I hadn't thought possible. But now, finally, I could see it. And the path ahead, even without guarantees, began to take shape with a different kind of courage. That night, after my children left, I sat alone on the porch of Mary Ellen's house. The sky was clear, and the wind blew with that gentleness that only those who have experienced heartbreak understand as comfort. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was something more mature, deeper. A silent acknowledgement of my own journey. And, most importantly, of the transformation that was happening within me. Slow, steady, irreversible. There, looking at the sky, I remembered how many times I wished I could disappear. How many times I kept quiet in the name of peace. How many times I cloaked myself in silence just to keep up appearances. And all of this, I did thinking I was being strong. But today I understand that strength isn't hiding. It's staying whole even after being torn apart inside. It's rebuilding yourself from the truths life reveals, even when we're not ready. I learned that a mother's value isn't in the clothes she wears, nor in what she does for others. It's in the story she carries within her, in the difficult decisions no one saw, behind the scenes of a lifetime dedicated to love, often unrequited. And I also learned that dignity isn't something you receive from others. It's something you choose, something you claim, something you carry with courage even when everything around you tries to dim your light. This journey has taught me more than years of silence. It has taught me that there is power in presence. That no matter how much they try to diminish you, no one can erase a soul that refuses to be forgotten. That every little wrinkle on my face carries memories worth telling. That every scar on my heart is proof that I survived, and I remain here, strong, aware of who I am. And you, who are listening to me now, may be experiencing something similar. Maybe you're experiencing that kind of pain that has no name, that feeling of being slowly forgotten, of looking around and no longer recognizing yourself in your own life. Maybe you're wondering if there's still time, if it's still worth it, if there's still a way out. And I tell you, from my heart to my heart, There is. Don't accept being invisible. Don't accept being treated like a remnant of your own story. You are not a burden. You are a root. And roots, even when unseen, support entire trees. Your story matters. Your love matters. What you've experienced, even if no one has thanked you, has built so much more than you can imagine. And no one can take that away from you. There's a hidden truth that few have the courage to face. Those who sow ingratitude reap loneliness. It may take time, it may seem like the world rewards selfishness, but life is necessary. It demands. And sooner or later, everyone reaps exactly what they sow. I don't wish ill on my children. I just hope that one day they will truly feel what mature love is, the kind that doesn't accept crumbs. Since everything happened, I've been receiving notes, letters, messages. People who heard parts of this story and said, "This woman could be my mother. This pain could be mine." And that made me understand the impact an honest narrative can have. When we allow ourselves to speak, we allow others to recognize themselves. And this mirror, however painful, is also an invitation to change. Perhaps this is the greatest revelation of all this, that what hurt me can also heal others. That my broken silence can break the silence of so many other women, so many grandmothers, so many mothers forgotten in their own homes. It is this awareness that moves me now. No longer the desire to be loved as before, but the desire to live truthfully from now on. To make each new step I take reflect the woman I have become. Not the one they expected me to be, but the one I chose to be. And it was with this thought that I rose from my chair that night, closed my eyes for a moment, and felt that something new was, indeed, beginning. Because when we stop seeking approval and start seeking connection, with ourselves, with those who respect our essence, life changes its tone. And it was there, in that simple, silent moment, that too noticed. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this story touched your heart, and I thank you for sticking with me until the end. What we've created here isn't just a video. It's a space for listening, for remembrance, for reflection. And if at any point you saw yourself in these words, if you felt this message was also for you, write here in the comments, "That was for me." It's always nice to see how many stories intersect in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue watching content like this, which goes beyond the surface and speaks directly to the soul. Each subscription is like a silent hug saying, "I'm here. This matters." And if this video made you feel something, anger, emotion, strength, or even relief, please leave a like. Not because of the number, but because it shows that this connection made sense. And if you want to continue this conversation, there's a video right here that complements all of this in a special way. Click and continue with me there. The story isn't over yet.